On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. To discover the best in events and performances, visit blumenthalarts.org.
Thing you need to ask yourself if you can live without writing. Do you have to write? Quietest hour of the night, ask yourself, do I have to write? And if the answer is a strong yes, you have to change your life around that answer. So not everyone who call themselves an artist have to write or paint or act, but I think I would say that everyone is at the core of Boom, or people who have consciously or not answered those questions. For them, they cannot exist without doing what they do. With that comes a completely different, you're taking a stance in the world, you're choosing a certain mode of existence, which defines them. So there's something about this, that becoming an artist, which completely transforms you.
Manoj Kesavan is a cultural catalyst and creative instigator. He is co-founder of Chaos, a nonprofit open studio of creative professionals who plan and activate spaces for community and cultural engagement. Chaos is the organizational enterprise behind Boom Charlotte, an artist-led annual 3-day fringe festival showcasing contemporary and experimental performance and visual art. Manoj is also the founder of Point Aid Forum, a gathering of artists, architects, and designers who explore multidisciplinary topics. He is the organizer of PechaKucha Charlotte, an event presentation series, and served as a founding team member of TEDx Charlotte. In this episode, we explore the art of making things happen and doing what one must. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Manoj, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What is Boom?
Well, Boom is an annual gathering of creative individuals and groups of all kinds. So it's a celebration of creativity. So we have everything from food to film. A bit of focus on the more experimental, I would say the fringier kinds of theater, dance, performance. In just 2 years, it has grown to include all kinds of creative fields and media. So you'll have installations, pop-up performances, dance, theater, music, film. Yeah, it's more a question of what you won't experience there in the artistic realm.
Well, you described it as experimental and fringy. What makes it experimental and fringy?
So there are two sides to Boom right now, and that's how it developed and evolved. Part of the motivation was a lot of cities have so-called fringe festivals, and Charlotte never had one. So the big one, the most famous one, the oldest one, is the one in Edinburgh, of course, which is maybe the largest art festival in the world. And around here, Asheville and Atlanta and the Triangle region, they all had these kind of festivals. So some of the artists I've been working with, people like Quentin Talley and Sarah Emery, Taproot, XOXO, and Matt Gosper. All these people have been going to other fringe festivals, and they wanted to see something like that here. So that is the idea behind it. But the interesting thing which happened was that we also added this big outdoor kind of hangout space, just space where a lot of things will be going on, this big free venue. And then that grew into, which we called the intersection, and that grew into a really big thing in itself. So by the second year, we had some 33 these ticketed, more experimental, full-length pieces. I would say mostly theater or dance or anything in that spectrum, because some of them are very hard to categorize. Then there were also close to 50 other music and film and, like I said, all kinds of shows. Piedmont Culinary Guild was there, food tastings, and 100 Word Film Festival did a small showcase there, along with the Q&A with the directors. So, yeah, it suddenly became the annual coming together of the broadest range of creative talent in Charlotte. It feels like the creative community was looking for something like this. And as soon as we created that platform, now we get far more interest than we have time or venues for. Starts a Friday evening. Saturday's the big day. It goes from pretty much noon till midnight, and Sunday evening. So multiple locations in Plaza Midwood.
And why did you choose Plaza Midwood?
Well, we need an area with a lot of these smaller venues, and Plaza Midwood is really the only neighborhood left with that kind of things. And the other thing is that it's pretty much all small businesses there. They are wonderfully supportive. I mean, we cannot thank that neighborhood and the businesses enough. I mean, otherwise we won't be able to do it. I mean, they're just so, we get most of the spaces for practically free. So they really love having us there. We love them back. So it's such a supportive neighborhood. There's a kind of a small ecosystem of restaurants, music venues, and all kinds of businesses there. So it's so easy to integrate into that. And in a way, it's also part of the DNA of these fringe festivals is also to take art to the fringes of the city, not the big venues, not the center of the city, but occupy the crevices and corners, which normally wouldn't have these kind of things. And that neighborhood still has those leftover spaces. Everything is not so planned and sanitized and beautified unlike most of the rest of Charlotte.
What are the rewards in organizing it, in executing it, in delivering it for the city?
In addition to terrible existential angst and financial worries, health issues. I like to use the plural than I, because, I'm basically just the orchestrator. I feel like this works because we are able to combine and focus the aspirations of a lot of creative individuals. And that's the reason why we can operate at such a big scale with such a small infrastructure. So we see a lot of potential in it. First of all, what's remarkable about this is I don't know if any such festival or creative gathering has ever happened of this scale using this kind of a alternative collaborative model. So the example I usually talk of, the so-called Wikipedia model, which is not the perfect example, but I think it's a useful example. So how that kind of transformed, how revolutionary it was. And this is Wikipedia is something we take for granted these days, but it was launched roughly 16 years ago. So if somebody had told us at that time that tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people will spend pretty much millions of hours creating content, editing each other, creating this largest ever free encyclopedia, that's an insane idea. That's not how Homo economicus works, right? But the crazier thing was that if somebody told us that in the process, it'll bring down this almost 250-year-old edifice of the Britannica, which world over, if you think of an encyclopedia, you would think of Britannica or some imitation of it. It's just, again, a crazy idea. So I feel like what really happened there was, like most traditional institutions, the Britannica was modeled on, the model is based on control and exclusion. It's a few people sitting in London or some place like that who defines what knowledge is, what needs to be preserved, who gets to talk about it. So it is this very top-down, hierarchical, controlled kind of an environment. Wikipedia came and blew the doors open. So you could create a Wikipedia entry on life and meaning. There's nobody saying that, that doesn't, it's not worthy of being there. So as soon as a newer platform came up, which by design was open and inclusive, the traditional model, which was very exclusive and which was very expensive, just couldn't hold up to that. So the biggest potential for something like Boom that I see is that this is that newer model of this open, inclusive model of creation and sharing of culture. And I feel like that's something very exciting about early 21st century. There are these huge structural shifts happening. So the experimental nature is not just in what you see on stage, it's in even the very model of how it's done, which I feel would have farther-reaching consequences than what manifests itself, what people experience.
Why is Boom important to Charlotte?
this model is very important because Charlotte now very famously has a huge problem of inclusion and diversity and a huge problem of segregation, mistrust between communities. And that segregation is not just racial. I mean, that's the most obvious one, but also age-wise. And, we are so siloed and divided in so many ways. So Boom, I think, is by far the most diverse gathering of creative people and audiences, at least that I have seen in the last 15 years in Charlotte. And that's not because, we tick boxes and we do the, include every community, but it just happens organically. So again, I think that's the strength of the model. It's about, shows more about how we do it. And I think that's also the reason why it's grown so fast, it's taken off so quickly, that it's becoming a solution to a lot of problems that a lot of people have been trying to solve. As a city with these kind of sociological issues, I think that is one significance of this. As far as the arts community is concerned, this has been central to everything we have done over the years, but it's just, with Boom, it's just of a larger scale. Now, what really attracts and keeps a creative individual in the city is primarily the community, primarily the presence of others like them, who set a high standard, challenge them. So creating that intentional community of artists is so important, which again, I think Charlotte is really behind on those things. So any place in the world where you see this new movements of art coming out of, at the core would be this group of artists. So it's that kind of a community which really is there way before patronage or money or, I can give you a lot of examples from around the world, but whether it's early 20th century Paris or the mid-century Latin America of Garcia Marquez and Llosa and all those people, or like the Harlem Renaissance. And so these kind of huge game-changing movements of art often come from the most unlikely places.
You described Boom as open and inclusive. Is the work curated?
Well, that's actually a great question, and I don't have so yes and no, because to be frank, I don't want to slip into semantics and stuff, but we've been using the term curator, but we also been discussing maybe we need to use some other term because of the implications and associations of that word with traditional exclusive institutions, with the all-powerful curator deciding what is art. That's exactly the thing we don't want. But again, because of the limitations we have of space and time, we have to be selective. So there is a group of some of the artists I mentioned before, and it's an always constantly changing group. It's not the same group of people deciding. So there is an application process. So we review and try to include, one of the main criteria is that try to see if no two shows are the same. So we kind of select based on providing the widest range, and also trying to showcase things which riskier, more experimental. Partly because, again, there's not too many other venues where you could see that. But other than that, first of all, there is absolutely no control of content. So we often see on stage, which surprises ourselves in so many different ways. So the usual, again, there is a selection process, but we also try to make it as inclusive and uncontrolled as possible. So that's a kind of a constantly, these are kind of the very serious discussions we have within the group. It would be wonderful if anyone can come in and put on anything, but again, given that we just have limited number of slots, how do we keep it open? How do you keep it fresh? How do we make sure that newer voices are included and represented, so that doesn't become the same group of people doing the same things? And this is something I keep repeating, that the whole idea is that not to overthrow the old gatekeepers to be the new gatekeepers. This sounds like a cliche, but some of my best friends are curators. Again, it's not that I'm opposed to the whole idea, but again, we could slip into some rabbit holes here because the whole idea of curated life, and it's become a overused kind of a term in pop culture now. But yeah, so it's not my objection to curating, and like I said, I have greatest respect for some of my curatorial friends here. They really opened my eyes to, like, for example, Carla's show about Romare Bearden a few years ago at the Mint was one of the most memorable shows I've ever seen.
What are your hopes for Boom?
I don't know if I have any hopes for Boom. One of the things we again talk about within our group is I would say the trap that a lot of, whether it's event series or even institutions, fall into is that they become defined by what they do, especially once something like Boom happens and it clicks and becomes so popular. So suddenly they decide, okay, this is what you're going to do. And they model the whole organization, all infrastructure on that one thing. I believe that Boom is successful because this is something that Charlotte needed at this point. But 10 years from now, this kind of a huge annual gathering might not be what Charlotte needs. So the question we ask ourselves is, how can we be defined by, first of all, why we do things and how we do things? So why, of course, is doing something which is relevant to the time and place, to put it broadly. Again, I feel like Boom is that right now, but again, down the road might not be that. How we do it is, as I said, maintain that openness, the inclusiveness, the flexibility, so that we really are creating is that way of doing things, that infrastructure, the way for this very diverse group of artists and anyone who cares for culture to come together and work at a big scale. And I feel like it can be used in so many ways. So it need not be a big annual gathering. It could be something which happens different parts of the city around the year. It could take so many forms. So we are always open to that. And so back to your question, what I would hope for is that it remains completely relevant and needed, and that we are able to respond to that.
Who is the we that you are referring to?
The simple answer or simplistic answer is artists.
There is someone who is doing this work.
Right.
And there is a manifesto, an idea, a philosophy that is guiding this work that you are engaged in. Who is the we?
Well, at the core is a group of local artists who I met and I guess brought together over the years. So starting way back with the Point 8 forums through PechaKucha and all the things we had done, the big Quasimodo project during the DNC. So that group kept growing and evolving. And it's pretty much that kind of a group of artists who are at the core. And then, I also have a nonprofit, which is the kind of infrastructure behind this. So we have a board of directors, a fantastic board of very dedicated people who work so hard to make it happen. So that's the combined we here.
Manoj, you've described yourself as a conceptual artist engaged in social practice. What do those words mean to you?
So I feel like we live in a time where these definitions are shifting every day. So I'm sure I said these things before, but I don't know if I'll use those exact terms right now, because as soon as you try to define it, it feels like those terms become stagnant and limiting. And I think a lot of people, like myself, are trying to not be held back or defined by those kind of things. I would rather use the term architect because that's my background, and I do work in the social sphere. So I think that's one of the fascinating things happening now in the artistic world. Like myself, I feel like a lot of artists are finding themselves moving from people who make things, make objects or performances or buildings, to making things happen. So kind of social orchestrators. So yes, so behind Boom, everything that we do is, I think that's kind of a spirit, which I feel like that's something very interesting, and that's what's new, or that's what's really happening in the world now.
Many people claim to make things happen.
Sure. Some people actually do.
What makes what you make happen art?
Huh. Well, I don't know. Again, I'm not. I don't really care what others label it as. I mean, in our case, in a way, we work in a more traditional media of art. So most of what you see at Boom is what is traditionally considered art, whether it's installation or theatrical performance or dance or music or whatever. But I know that a lot of artists now are going way beyond that, reviving neighborhoods or tackling environmental problems. So, which again, I think what is significant about what's happening right now, the definitions are shifting. The realm is expanding so fast, almost like what happened 100 years ago with the advent of modern art. Things inconceivable as art suddenly became part of the realm. And I think a similar kind of explosive expansion is happening right now. So artists are no longer held back by a medium. Interestingly, a lot of these artists, like myself, have a solid footing in a particular medium, but later in their lives they break out of that. And the saying, I went from somebody who made things to somebody who made things happen. I'm basically quoting Natalie Jeremichenko, who's an artist based in New York City, the founder of this collective called X Design. It's a collective of environmental scientists and artists.
The notion of art as social practice is new, is interesting, is an evolution. But many people think of that simply as social work or community engagement work. How is it art?
The definition of art is something which is always in flux, especially in the modern era. So a little over 100 years ago, a Piet Mondrian painting wouldn't have been considered art. It would have been just lines and colors or decoration or whatever. So yeah, I mean, once in many generations, there comes this kind of seismic shifts, as I was saying earlier, the explosive expansion of realm. That's when what was until then inconceivable as art suddenly becomes included and later often central to what is considered art from that point onwards. And I would say in a more philosophic sense, what are the so-called transcendentals in ancient Greek philosophy? Truth, beauty, and justice, I guess. So art is normally considered part of the aesthetic realm. And I think one of the things which happens in this kind of pivotal times is that art kind of breaks out of that and to encompass everything. It becomes as much about truth, as much about ethics, which is really what happened 100 years ago. So, a lot of modernism, especially in architecture, had a very strong ethical component to it. So the first big project of modernism was workers' housing in Stuttgart, where the biggest names like Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, J.J.P. Allwood, all of them were designing these cheap houses. So the whole idea was that architecture is no longer an elite thing. It is something finally everyone can enjoy, good life, high living, and architecture was supposed to serve that purpose. Although the interesting thing which happened was that once it got imported into the US and then re-exported as international style, it kind of slid back into more of an aesthetic thing. It kind of lost its ethical and metaphysical qualities. So right now, I think what's happening now is that art is becoming more about trying to fix the deep social or environmental, issues of the world. So instead of beautifying a corner in a superficial way, really addressing the existential ugliness of life. So that's what you see in some of the most influential artists of our time, people like Theaster Gates or Natalie Jeremichenko or even Melchin, who's a little bit older, but he's a pioneer of these kind of things. And I see this kind of movements happening everywhere globally. Assemble, the group of young architects who won the Turner Prize a couple of years ago in UK. So yes, a lot of people would not consider it art because some of them might look more like what people call social work or environmental mitigation. But I think it's really what's happening is that in a time when the society is so fragmented, everything's so specialized, artists are becoming the new generalists in a highly specialized and fragmented world. The people are stepping back into the society and trying to make sense of it and trying to do something about it.
What do you see is the role of the artist in community?
I don't know if there's any one role. I mean, it's up to each artist.
What do you make of the current art scene?
Well, there is a lot of talent. I'm talking about from the perspective of people who actually create art, not art institutions or that kind of the more established way of sharing art. I'm talking from the creation standpoint. There is so much incredible talent and too little venues for them, whether to work or to share. So in a way, directly or indirectly, trying to address some of those issues.
You don't see it as a supply issue. You see it as a demand issue.
I don't think in those terms.
Well, let's think about it in those terms.
Okay.
Why isn't there more of the sharing and consumption of the art that is being produced by talented people in Charlotte? What do you see as the obstacle or barrier to a more flourishing art scene?
That's a big question. I think cities like, I would say secondary cities like Charlotte have a bit of an issue where most people who really care for art, and even some of the people who create art, there is kind of an inferiority complex for every city like Charlotte. So the question is, if you're so good, why are you here? Why are you not in New York or Paris or someplace like that? Which is a problem. So people tend to undervalue what's here, and which also leads to, it kind of becomes a vicious circle. So that leads to people leaving.
There are second-tier cities with first-tier art.
There are, yes, a few.
We can think of many American cities that are the size of Charlotte: Austin, Nashville, Memphis, San Francisco, that have great, robust art scenes.
Right.
Your statement earlier is that there are great artists here in Charlotte. Do you really think so?
Oh, yeah. I know them, a lot of them.
Right. So why don't we think of Charlotte as having a great art scene if we have great artists here in Charlotte?
So it is not adding up to much. That's the thing. There are a lot of creative talent, but there is no, I would say there's no coherent movement or in a group of artists coming around a certain style or movement. And also, we have some really good art institutions who are really a great window to the larger art world, but there is really no stepping stone between the grassroots and that, I would say, the high art. So there is no infrastructure here. And I think that's one of the, I would say, the cultural failures of Charlotte as a city, to create that infrastructure for, let's say, mobility. You talk about social mobility a lot here, but this amazing artists and art groups, like a lot of these small companies who are part of Boom, they've been producing really exceptional work, but they are stuck in that cycle of poverty. We saw a lot of, I would say, mid-level institutions collapse in the last few years, like Cast and Moving Poets. And to their great credit, Light Factory was able to survive and kind of have a rebirth, Actors Theatre. And I think that has been one of the big issues here. I mean, we have some large institutions who we can really be proud of. A lot of people would say it's not enough, and I would agree, but at least we are able to sustain them. But beyond that, we haven't been able to build that ecosystem of growth and health at every level, the grassroots, at the mid-level, at the high level. So I think there's been a lack of a bigger vision.
That ecosystem also includes element of criticism.
Yes.
That supports, encourages, highlights, showcases, and celebrates that kind of work.
Excellent point, yes. And some of the media have been, I would say, the main three print publications, The Observer, Charlotte Magazine, and Creative Loafing, have been, interestingly, the most supportive. But there's so much other media here for whom, again, if they have any coverage, it starts and ends at some of the big institutions, and which is a problem.
Manoj, where did you grow up?
In southern India, in this state called Kerala. I think I had a pretty nice and happy childhood. My parents are still in Kerala. My dad is a doctor, now a retired orthopedic surgeon who worked for the state health service there. My mom is stay at home. I have an older brother, so small family, kind of typical of that generation there, at least in middle class.
India is traditionally a caste society. I understand that you are a Brahmin.
Yes. Yeah, I don't really associate with any religion or caste, but yeah, I was born into a Brahmin family.
What does that mean for those who may be unfamiliar with the term?
So Brahmanas are the priestly class, one of the upper castes. That comes with a bit of privilege. Not necessarily a lot of money, because by that time there's been so much of redistribution and stuff. But again, it does come with several people in my parents' generation went to college, so which is not too usual. So yeah, it's coming from an educated family, having books around and things like that. So,
what was the expectation for you growing up in your family?
Unlike a lot of Indian families, there wasn't any effort or pressure from my parents for me to do any particular thing or be anything. So yeah, we were allowed to make our own mistakes and find our own path in life.
Brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I have an older brother who's right now back in India. Used to be in the Middle East and now is based in India again.
I'm trying to imagine a young Manoj. What were you like as a teenager?
As dorky as I'm now, I guess. Well, one of the things is that, since my dad was working for the government health service, we used to move around you transfer to a different town, all in that same region, every 3-4 years. So I don't have a hometown because what I call my hometown is where my folks settle, but I don't know anyone there really. So there's been a lot of moves and upheavals, and I think that's reason why also I've lived in 10 or 11 towns or cities in 3 countries over the years. So strangely enough, Charlotte is by far the longest I've lived in one city. I've been here for 15 years now. So yeah, I moved to a new town, make new friends, and then it's time to move on. Yeah, I don't know. I started reading a lot when I got to middle school, and I think that has been a huge influence on my life, becoming who I am, I guess.
How do you think moving from one town to the next shaped and influenced you as an adult?
There's a poem by Marina Tsvetaeva called Homesickness. She's Russian, but she was living in different places in Europe. So I'm badly paraphrasing her, but she says something like, "It doesn't matter to me anymore which streets I walk on as an outcast. It doesn't matter to me where I don't belong." So I think there is something very freeing in that, so that I could just move to any other city because I'm used to being that outsider. And I feel like, I'm sure you have experienced it yourself. It's not a good feeling, but I think now I'm using it to my advantage. So be that outside voice, be that person with that different perspective.
Do you think of yourself as an outsider?
Yes, I do. And, I think a lot of people who do, even if they're not, immigrants or of a minority, but, there are a lot of people who are outsiders. And in a way, I feel like our collective is like a group of outsiders. Maybe you could even tie it into Camus' Stranger. And, because I think there is some existential kind of a not being able to fit in, I think is in the DNA of a lot of contemporary artists.
You studied architecture.
Yeah, still continuing to study architecture.
What drew you to architecture?
Well, so growing up in small towns in southern India, I really didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know a single practicing architect until I got into college. So I had a friend in high school who was, was really good in drawing, and I used to draw pretty well too. And I was very interested in reading and literature, so there was a lot of pressure to either choose engineering or medicine at that time, if you're a good student. This was the pre-economic boom India, so those are the 2 fields which are supposed to provide some economic stability. So neither of them interested me well, so it's my friend who said, there's this other thing, it's kind of like engineering, but it's more creative. So we had to take this entrance examinations, and there's a separate aptitude test for architecture. So I took that and I cleared. So I joined architecture, and really, even then I didn't know. I was thinking maybe I'll switch to some other better paying thing like computer science or something. But once I joined, I really liked it. So I kind of happened upon architecture.
Where did you go to school?
University of Kerala. It's in a city called Trivandrum, College of Engineering. It was part of the oldest engineering college in the state. It was the oldest architecture department in the state. So kind of one of the very old reputed schools.
Do you speak other languages?
Well, my mother tongue is the main language in Kerala. It's called Malayalam, which was my primary language. So English was my secondary language. Most Indians can understand or speak Hindi a little bit. I did my college internship in New Delhi. So the adjacent state as the language is Tamil, and I can understand enough to watch movies in Tamil. If I go there for a few weeks, I'm sure I can start speaking again. So yeah, 3 Indian languages.
When you were at home, what language do you speak?
Malayalam. Yeah, completely. Yeah, there are 4 major South Indian languages, which are, interestingly, they come from a completely different lineage of language. They are called the Dravidian languages. It's not part of the Indo-European family of languages, although there's been so much of intermingling, and so many Sanskrit words have got into it. Sanskrit being kind of the proto-language for Hindi and a lot of the modern Indian languages, very close to Latin and a lot of European languages. So this is a completely different branch, India has some 500 languages, so there are a lot of others too. But these are the major ones in the sense that, I don't know, more than 1 million people must be speaking these languages.
When did you come to America?
In 1999.
And what brought you here?
Came for my master's, in architecture at Kansas State. I was teaching there part-time for almost 2 years. So I was there for 3.5 years. The first place I got into was Manhattan, Kansas. That's not exactly what I had in mind about America. And it's, I'd lived in Dubai before, which is very cosmopolitan, and, I was working for a British firm. So, it wasn't that big a cultural shock or anything like that. And there's also something about the architectural colleges. So when you're in a studio, I think there's kind of an international culture. So if you walk into any architectural studio anywhere in the world, because, we all worship Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. So yeah, it's, and I think that is something about the artistic training that, that kind of transcends the cultures we are born into. In a way, that's the kind of thing which I think also unites a lot of the very diverse group of artists I work with now, because we are all primarily artists before we are anything else. So yeah, so yes, it's not exactly what I'd seen in TV or movies, but same time, since my focus was on architecture, it felt right at home in some ways.
Did you expect to stay after earning your master's degree?
No, but also, I've been kind of going with the flow. I hadn't too many plans or anything, so I was just open to whatever comes up.
And what happened next after you earned your degree?
Well, 9/11 happened during that time, so there was that last recession, nothing as bad as the more recent one. So, started applying for jobs, because you could work for a year on the same visa. So either go into a more permanent employment or go back. So got job offers in, I don't remember, like Columbus, Ohio, St. Louis, Atlanta. So I was kind of choosing between cities, and just based on the first impression I had, this felt like the right kind of place. There's something about the greenery and lushness which was very attractive.
Here in Charlotte?
Yeah.
When did you come to Charlotte?
So yeah, the first time I came here in the summer of 1999 for job interviews and stuff, and then I moved here at the end of 2002.
What is Point 8?
Point 8 is a forum I started soon after I moved here. The name came much later. I came to work at Odell Associates, one of the old firms here, and like a month after I got here, started this little lunchtime discussion group to talk about more abstract concepts, mostly about architecture. The interesting thing which happened was that, so they were right in the middle of the city at that time, 2 blocks from my call center. Joey Lasseter Gallery was in the same building at that time. There were a lot of excellent galleries around there, not a lot, but 4 of them, WDO, Noel, and Hodges Taylor. So with my nature, I kind of tend to become friends with artists and people in the art sector. So interestingly, a lot of artists and some of these gallery owners started coming to our lunchtime discussions in the office. And when I left that firm, it kind of became an independent thing, which then we called it Point 8, just a kind of a random name because we needed to start a website and we didn't have a name. So for like first 3 years, it didn't have any name. It was just a random gathering. So it got formalized into, these days I would call it more like a TED Talk followed by a discussion, or framed for a discussion. So like a TED Talk, the talk is usually 15 to 20 minutes about a certain topic. And we had a very, very interesting range of. So once it left that architecture firm, it became more broadly about creativity and art, and just no longer just about architecture.
When did you begin thinking of yourself as someone who could help shape and influence the art and intellectual scene in Charlotte?
I don't know if there was a sudden realization of that. I think that kind of role just came about because wherever I go, I start these kind of things. I did something at grad school. I had a little kind of start as more of a architecture film club. Then it became we started hanging out, and we started a little college magazine. So soon after I came here, I started this thing. So it's my nature to bring people together, create these kind of forums or platforms. I think I was, at the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the right time, because there wasn't much happening in Charlotte. So these kind of things, most of the things you try just seem to just take off. Boom being the latest example. Get something moving, and then it starts moving and starts dragging you along. So some of these things, that's how it happened. And that led to other things.
One of the things it led to was PechaKucha or Pechaka.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And what is Pechaka or PechaKucha?
PechaKucha. Well, so PechaKucha was one of the first. Later, there are so many similar kind of, I would say, community or crowd-led events. TEDx came later. Now Creative Mornings came to Charlotte later. Creative Mornings started kind of around the same time. So PechaKucha was maybe the first major one. It started in Tokyo in an architecture firm. They had these parties, and people wanted to share like travel photos and stuff. So they came up with this arbitrary framework. You can show 20 images, and they're on auto advance. Each image is up for 20 seconds. So 20 by 20, you get 400 seconds, and you have the stage. And that became such a popular thing, so they branded it as PechaKucha, which means chit-chat in Japanese. So the whole point is that these are very casual social events. These are not the stiff formal presentations. They're usually held in bars or nightclubs, or there is an official beer break everywhere in between. So that started spreading virally. So I think San Francisco, Chicago were one of the earlier ones in the US. And because it also, I think, started spreading more in the architectural circles, because it started an architecture forum. So people started asking us, why don't you do one here? So we thought, okay, sure, we'll give it a try. So we write to Tokyo, get the license. And so you have to prove that Charlotte is big enough and we have the experience in doing that. And, they gave us a license, and that also took off like we never imagined. So our forums used to have maybe 50 people at the most, or maybe we had one that's for 70, but it's usually 40 to 50 people. And the first one was at Petra's. We were expecting some 100 people, but it was 200 plus people, standing room only.
Had you attended one before you actually hosted one?
No. Neither had I attended a fringe festival before starting one here. I have no idea what I'm getting into normally. I guess it's a pattern in my life. I didn't know any architect until I joined architecture school.
Well, perhaps if you knew better, you wouldn't have done it.
That's right.
What were your...
Fools rush in, right?
Yes, fools rush in. What were your aspirations?
No, I don't know if I have any aspirations in life, really. No, but, it felt like something which is interesting, and, something, the kind of things we could do and maybe the city needs. So these are all, I guess, like all creative initiatives. It's kind of a leap of faith. You feel like, oh, we could do something with this, or there's some creative possibility here. So you take that leap. So
you are an architect, but there came a time when you no longer practiced architecture and made a more definitive commitment to this work that you're doing as a community artist.
The change kind of happened slowly, but it was in 2011 that I kind of left the field, and it's 2012 officially that I started Chaos with that residency at the McCall Center. On one hand, as you know, it was the worst recession in anyone's memory, and it hit the building industry especially hard. So what was even before more of a technical, not very creative kind of a field become quite a drudgery. Every little thing became so contentious. And so on one hand, I was very unsatisfied with the work I did every day. And also I reached a senior enough level where I could see what I'll be doing for the rest of my life. On the other hand, I was so fascinated by the way things like PechaKucha or TEDx came along. And as you might know, I was one of the founding team members of TEDx, chaired the first speaker committee. Things like that were really taking off. And, it's a whole new phenomenon. None of that. So I think PechaKucha was started in Tokyo in 2004. We started in 2008. TEDx, I think, was started in 2008. We started the Horn here in 2010, I think. So all these it's just a group of volunteers coming together, but putting on this pretty high quality, high impact events. So fascinated by that model. And, being involved in those things was very exciting. First of all, you are working with and showcasing some of the most interesting, creative, thoughtful people. So I thought, but maybe because my background is in architecture, I enjoyed these things, but I was also wondering what it would look like if we take it one step further. So PechaKucha, TEDx, or now Creative Mornings, these are great places to meet, share ideas, but it's still talk. So what would it look like? Can we use that model to actually create something, to build something? So that's the idea behind the organization Chaos, which was started in 2012. And thanks to Suzanne Fetcher, we got a chance to do the residency at the McCall Center. When I told Suzanne, kind of thinking of taking the leap, and she said, "Why don't you do it here?" Yeah, so it has been very rewarding. And so even in 2012, I had no idea that we'll be, organizing this biggest art festival in just a few years. But that again happened because in 2012, the DNC was coming to town. So a lot of artists wanted to do something. There were no platforms. There was nobody to organize it. So we became that place. And so we started really huge. We had this 80 plus pop-up performances, 5 large-scale installations, some 18 bands performing, all for free, all in public spaces. So we started with this huge kind of collective showcase of art during the DNC, which literally got international attention. It was covered in media from around the world. So that also shifted the focus. I was imagining that we'll be doing more of, let's say, urban design projects or things closer to my background, but with the community, more pro bono projects. And we did do some projects like that. But what really took hold was once all these new artists joined the group, they wanted to keep doing these kind of things like that. So Boom came out of that. In some ways, it has been a very interesting experience. We've been going places where we never imagined we'll be going. And as I said before, it's very rewarding that in the sense that I get to work with some of the most interesting, original, creative people in town, which is, I think, a huge reward in itself.
Manoj, you do all this interesting work. You play this vital role in the city in terms of helping our culture evolve. You are a change maker in that respect. You're pushing the edges of what is considered art and what is perceived good art in our city. What don't people know about what you do and who you are, and what it means, and the emotional burdens often of this work?
I guess, something of the scale of Boom happens because there's so many people who are willing to put in tremendous amounts of work and their talent and everything into it. And that's because, they trust in me, and not just in me, often me means the group of people I'm surrounded myself with. So there's a lot of reflected glory there. And that can become a also a big weight. And that's usually the biggest pressure. So with that trust comes this huge responsibility of having to live up to all those aspirations. And so I was, kind of joking to Lou Kynerd before the first boom that if boom is a disaster, I need to leave town, because I enlisted every person I know from, starting with people like Tom Gabbard and Jennifer Appleby to like every artist I know. And again, for some reason they said yes, but once you create that big group, you also have that responsibility to lead it to a proper conclusion. And more than that, and this is something I'm very aware of, and I keep reminding everyone in the team, that everyone involved at every level feels good being a part of it, because that's what we have. If it should be a good experience, it'll be a lot of work, but at the end of the day, they should feel like they were part of something. It was worth it. Without that, none of this would happen. That's the currency we have. Mm-hmm. That is a lot of pressure, and
I asked a question of a mutual friend of ours, Philip Larimore, whether art requires melancholy. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
I don't know if I'd say it requires melancholy, but we talked about the redefinition of art with, let's say, modernism, which I know is a very broad term, in the 20th century. And we talked about art breaking out of that, being confined in the realm of aesthetics to cover truth and justice. I think it's kind of a byproduct of that. So to use a harder term than melancholy, let's say depression. Depression is a vehicle that allows one to sink below the surface of life. Depressives are usually perhaps the most realistic people you'd find. And unfortunately, a lot of those people who sink can never surface again. But I think a lot of wonderful art comes from when you resurface that deeply true perspective you gain on life and existence really has illuminated a lot of contemporary art. Some of the most influential artists like Dostoevsky or Emily Dickinson, or it's a huge list, Rainer Maria Rilke, or a lot of their powerful art is, they were all people who struggle with depression.
How about Manoj Kesavan?
Well, yeah, I have struggled with it too all my adult life. And I think, in a way, I feel like a lot of the people I work with, that's something we all have in common. It's almost like we could see that dark shadow when you look at the other person. So yeah, and I think to answer your question, yes, I think it is in a way become essential to the identity of an artist. The longer answer to the question you asked earlier about when we say we, who do you talk about? And I said artists, and so the question being, who do you call an artist? And which I would go back to like that redefinition in the early 20th century. So my favorite is Rainer Maria Rilke's first letter to that young poet. This young poet wrote to him asking for his opinion on his poetry, and he wrote back saying something like, you're asking me, and I'm sure you asked a lot of people, but don't ask people for criticism, because criticism just rarely goes beyond the surface. The thing you need to ask is, ask yourself if you can live without writing. Do you have to write? Quietest hour of the night, ask yourself, do I have to write? And if the answer is a strong yes, you have to change your life around that answer. So not everyone who call themselves an artist have to write or paint or act, but I think I would say that everyone is at the core of Boom are people who have consciously or not answered those questions. For them, they cannot exist without doing what they do. With that comes a completely different, you're taking a stance in the world, you're choosing a certain mode of existence, which defines them. So there's something about this, that becoming an artist, which completely transforms you.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's always fun.
Manoj Kesavan is co-founder of Chaos, a nonprofit open studio of creative professionals, and organizer of Boom Charlotte, an artist-led fringe festival. Manoj holds a Master's of Architecture degree from Kansas State University and a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Kerala, India. And now, a personal word. Manoj Kesavan poses the question, what must I do? For him, the answer is he must make things happen. He must bring people together in an open and inclusive way to showcase art that is grassroots, organic, experimental, and courageous. He must respond artistically to what is needed in the moment. This moment needs the building of trust, the broadening and crossing of boundaries, the expression of what is true and beautiful and just. In doing what he must, as Manoj noted, he is following the advice of the great German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Rilke was widely recognized as an intensely mystical and lyrical poet who spoke of love and existence. Between 1903 and 1908, Rilke exchanged letters with a young would-be poet. After Rilke's death in 1926, the letters were published. What did Rilke say? Here is an edited version of the first letter Rilke famously wrote. Paris, February 17, 1903. Dear Sir, your letter arrived just a few days ago. I want to thank you for the great confidence you have placed in me. I cannot discuss your verses, for any attempt at criticism would be foreign to me. Nothing touches a work of art so little as words of criticism. You ask whether your verses are any good. You are looking outside yourself, and that is what you should most avoid right now. There is only one thing you should do. Go into yourself. Find out the reason that commands you to write. Confess to yourself whether you would die if you were forbidden to write. This, most of all, ask yourself in the most silent hour of your night, must I write? And if the answer rings out yes, if you meet this solemn question with a strong, simple I must, then build your life in accordance with this necessity. Your whole life, even into its humblest hour, must become a sign and witness to this answer. If an artist's life seems poor, then the artist has no one to blame but himself. The artist must look within. Only artists who are unable to call forth the riches of their art are poor, because for the Creator there is no poverty, and no poor indifferent place. So, dear sir, I can't give you any advice but this, to go into yourself and see how deep the place from which your life flows. At its source, you will find the answer to the question of whether you must create. Perhaps you will discover that you are called to be an artist. Then take that destiny upon yourself and bear it, its burden and its greatness, without ever asking what reward might come from outside. For the Creator must be a world for himself, and must find everything in himself to whom his whole life must be devoted. Yours very truly, Rainer Maria Rilke. Manoj Kesavan knows that he must create. He has gone deep within himself to the place from which his life flows. He has committed his life to initiatives that spur art and innovation in ways that address the deep social and cultural issues of his city. Over the years, our work has intersected. I gave a presentation on the mythic quality of cities at Point 8, the forum Manoj founded. That year, Manoj wrote an opinion column on architecture for Charlotte Viewpoint, the cultural magazine I founded. I presented on my summer watching Turner Classic Movies for PechaKucha, the presentation series Manoj founded. I've attended Boom Charlotte, the fringe festival that Manoj has organized and leads. And Manoj is now a guest on this podcast. In between, we have attended hundreds of the same events in the city, have had discussions over coffee, and we have agreed and disagreed, as people with points of view about art and creativity do. As Manoj so eloquently noted, to be an artist is a conscious decision, a mode of existence, a stance in the world. It is the artist's burden to create the world in which they want to live, to bring forth truth and beauty and justice. The bargain is this, The artist bears the weight of creation, and in exchange creates what they must. It is a hard life, a difficult one. It is a life in which feelings and emotions overwhelm, where melancholy and anxiety and depression are common. There are many moments of doubt and solitude. But it is from that wellspring that our true and beautiful and just selves emerge. It is from the most silent hour of the night that an entire city can be transformed. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my partners Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.